The Bavarian-style village of Leavenworth, nestled in the snow-dusted mountains of Washington, looked like it had been pulled straight from a Christmas card. Twinkling lights adorned every shopfront, carolers sang in perfect harmony on the cobblestone streets, and the scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider lingered in the crisp winter air. Tourists milled about, their faces aglow with the joy that seemed to radiate from every corner of the town. Alaric Hensley, however, felt none of it. Standing in the lobby of the Snowhaven Inn, one of his many luxury hotels, he checked his watch with a sigh. The ornate Christmas tree behind him sparkled with hundreds of ornaments, but Alaric's attention was fixed on his phone. Emails, financial reports, and meeting schedules demanded his focus. Anything to distract him from the festive cheer around him. Mr. Hensley? His assistant, a young woman named Laurel, approached hesitantly. She had been working for him for 3 years and knew better than to interrupt him without a good reason. The mayor's office just called. They're confirming your participation in tomorrow's Christmas parade as Santa Claus. Alaric frowned. Santa Claus? He spoke the words as if they left a bad taste in his mouth. Why am I doing that? It's part of the town's tradition, Laurel explained. The parade raises funds for the Children's Hospital. Snowhaven Inn has sponsored it for years. It's expected of the hotel's owner to play the role. Alaric waved dismissively. Find someone else. I'm not interested. Laurel hesitated. With respect, sir, this town thrives on tradition. If you refuse, it won't reflect well on the hotel, or on you. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. The last thing he wanted was another reminder of Christmas. Ever since the accident, the holiday had become nothing more than a painful reminder of what he had lost. Yet, he knew Laurel was right. His reputation, and that of his business, depended on maintaining good relationships with the community. Begrudgingly, he nodded. Fine, he said, but I want it done quickly. No long speeches, no extra appearances. The following evening, the streets of Leavenworth were alive with laughter and music as the parade began. Families lined the sidewalks, bundled up in scarves and mittens, their faces lit with anticipation. Alaric sat uncomfortably on the throne of a decorated sleigh, wearing a red velvet suit and white beard. He forced a smile as the crowd cheered, waving half-heartedly at the children who shouted, Santa, Santa. The sleigh came to a stop in front of the Children's Hospital, where he was to hand out gifts. Stepping down, Alaric was immediately greeted by nurses, doctors, and volunteers who ushered him inside. The sterile hallways were transformed into a winter wonderland, with garlands and paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling. Children in pajamas and slippers waited eagerly in a brightly decorated room, their faces lighting up as Santa entered. Ho, 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 Alaric said mechanically, handing out presents one by one. He tried not to make eye contact, focusing instead on getting through the task as quickly as possible. But then, as he reached for another gift, a soft voice stopped him in his tracks. Hi, Santa. He looked up to see a little girl standing before him. Her golden curls framed a pale but radiant face, and her blue eyes sparkled with curiosity. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, but there was something about her presence that made the room seem quieter, more still. What's your name? He asked, his voice catching slightly. Clara, she said with a shy smile. What's yours? Alaric blinked, startled by the question. Well, I'm Santa, of course. Clara giggled. You don't look like the Santa from the movies. You look like someone who's sad. The comment hit him harder than he expected. Sad? Why would Santa be sad? I don't know, she said, tilting her head. Maybe because he forgot how to have Christmas magic. For a moment, Alaric didn't know how to respond. He handed her the gift he had been holding, a small stuffed reindeer, and watched as she hugged it tightly. Thank you, she said. But magic isn't something you can give with a present, isn't it? He asked, trying to mask his discomfort with a chuckle. Clara shook her head. Nope. Magic is when you make someone feel like they belong. Before he could say anything more, a nurse gently touched Clara's shoulder and guided her back to her seat. Alaric stood there, frozen, the little girl's words echoing in his mind. As the night ended and he returned to his suite at the Snowhaven Inn, Alaric found himself unable to focus on the emails waiting for him. Instead, His thoughts drifted back to Clara, the girl who looked so much like his late daughter, Lila, that it had sent a shiver down his spine. The resemblance was uncanny, and it stirred something deep within him, something he had tried to bury for years. Turning off his phone, he poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out the window at the bustling town below. Snowflakes fell gently, blanketing Leavenworth in white. For the first time in a long while, Alaric felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but one that left him restless. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find out more about Clara. The next morning, Alaric found himself walking through the snow-covered streets of Leavenworth, his breath visible in the icy air. The town was already alive with activity. Vendors setting up their booths, children pulling sleds, and visitors marveling at the Bavarian-inspired buildings. Despite the cheerful surroundings, Alaric's mind was elsewhere, occupied by thoughts of the little girl he'd met the night before. He made his way to the children's hospital, his footsteps crunching against the snow. A part of him questioned why he was doing this. Clara wasn't his responsibility. He had businesses to run, schedules to maintain, and a life that didn't involve sentimental detours. But there was something about her. Those blue eyes that mirrored his daughter's, her piercing honesty, and the way she spoke of magic as though it were something tangible that he couldn't ignore. When he arrived, he was greeted by the hospital's administrator, a middle-aged woman named Judith. She looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Hensley, this is a pleasant surprise. Did you forget something last night?" "No," Alaric replied, clearing his throat. "Actually, I wanted to ask about one of the children. Clara, the little girl with the golden curls." Judith's expression softened. "Ah, Clara. She's a special one, isn't she? Always so cheerful, even with everything she's been through." "What do you mean?" Alaric asked, his curiosity piqued. Judith gestured for him to follow her to her office. Once inside, she closed the door and motioned for him to sit. "Clara's had a tough life," she began. "Her mother passed away about a year ago from an overdose. Clara was placed into the foster system, but when she started showing signs of chronic illness, she was brought here for treatment. We've been monitoring her ever since." Alaric felt a pang of guilt. He had assumed she was just another child enjoying the festivities. "What illness?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Her doctors suspect a congenital heart defect. She'll need surgery eventually, but it's complicated. Clara doesn't have any immediate family to consent to treatment or provide long-term care. For now, she's staying at the children's shelter on the other side of town." Alaric sat back in his chair, letting the weight of Judith's words sink in. He thought about how tiny and fragile Clara had seemed, yet her spirit had been anything but. "No family at all?" he asked after a moment. Judith hesitated. "Well, there are rumors about a distant relative, a grandmother, perhaps, but nothing concrete. Clara's mother, Odessa, was estranged from her family. She didn't leave much behind, just a few papers and a locket Clara wears everywhere. It's heartbreaking, really." A faint chill ran down Alaric's spine. The name Odessa felt like a ghost from his past, stirring memories he had worked hard to bury. Could it be the same Odessa? No, it wasn't possible. His younger sister had left decades ago, cutting all ties with the family. The odds of Clara being connected to her seemed too far-fetched, yet he couldn't shake the feeling growing in his gut. "Do you mind if I visit the shelter?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Judith smiled warmly. "I think Clara would love that. She's been asking about Santa Claus all morning." By the time Alaric reached the shelter, the snow had picked up, falling in soft, heavy flakes. The building itself was modest but welcoming, with bright murals painted on the walls and holiday decorations in every corner. Children were gathered around a small Christmas tree in the common area, their laughter filling the space. Clara spotted him almost immediately and ran over, her curls bouncing with each step. "Santa!" she exclaimed, her smile lighting up her face. Alaric knelt to her level, feeling an odd sense of comfort in her presence. "Just visiting," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were taking care of that reindeer I gave you." She held up the stuffed animal proudly. "He's my favorite. I named him Dasher." "Well, Dasher looks happy," Alaric said. his lips curving into an uncharacteristic smile. "Are you happy too?" Clara's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly nodded. "I try to be," she said. "That's what my mom always told me. Even when things are hard, I should try to find something to smile about." Her words hit him harder than he expected, and he had to look away to compose himself. "That's a good lesson," he said finally. "Your mom must have been very wise." "She was," Clara agreed. "She gave me this before she went to heaven." She reached into the neckline of her sweater and pulled out a small, tarnished locket. "It's special." Alaric's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the locket. He recognized it immediately. It was old gold and engraved with a delicate floral pattern, an heirloom that had belonged to his mother. He had seen Odessa wear it many times before she left home. "Where did your mom get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said it was from her family," Clara replied. "She didn't talk about them much, though. She said it made her sad." Alaric's heart began to race. The pieces were falling into place, and the realization left him both shaken and overwhelmed. Clara wasn't just a random child who had caught his attention. She was family. But how could he tell her? How could he step into her life, claiming a connection she didn't even know existed? And more importantly, what did this mean for both of them moving forward? As Clara tugged his hand to show him a drawing she had made, Alaric knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. That night, Alaric returned to his suite at the Snowhaven Inn, but rest did not come easily. He sat in the dim light of the room, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth, the golden locket from Clara's neck etched in his mind. Memories long buried began to surface, of Odessa as a little girl, trailing behind him on the family farm, her laughter echoing through the fields. She had always been so spirited, so full of life, until she wasn't. The years of conflict with their parents, her sudden departure, and the silence that followed had left a scar he had learned to ignore. And now, this child, her child, was here, in his life, without even knowing the connection they shared. The weight of the revelation pressed on his chest. He had spent so many years building a life of wealth and success, believing he could outpace the pain of his past. Yet in one night, a little girl had unraveled it all. The next morning, driven by a determination he didn't fully understand, Alaric contacted Laurel and asked her to dig into Odessa's history. He wanted every detail, every lead that could confirm what his heart already knew. It took hours, but by late afternoon, Laurel called back with the answers he sought. "Sir, I was able to trace some records," she said. "Odessa Hensley is listed as Clara's mother. She passed away last December in Seattle. There's no listed father on Clara's birth certificate." Alaric gripped the phone tightly. "And Odessa's life before that? What happened after she left home?" "She had a string of odd jobs, nothing steady," Laurel explained. "It looks like she struggled with addiction for a time, but eventually cleaned up after Clara was born. Her records show that she tried to get custody back after a brief foster placement, but her health was failing. She died in a shelter." The details were like blows to Alaric's chest. Odessa had endured so much, yet she had kept Clara safe for as long as she could. And now Clara was alone, facing an uncertain future. "I need to do something for her," he said, more to himself than to Laurel. "Sir?" Laurel's voice was hesitant. "Are you sure? This isn't just a business decision. It's personal. It's family," Alaric corrected, the words tasting unfamiliar but right. "And I owe it to her." That evening, he returned to the shelter. Clara greeted him with the same bright smile, as though she had been waiting all day for his arrival. She was drawing at a small table in the corner of the common room, surrounded by other children, but seemingly lost in her own world. "Hi, Santa," she chirped as he approached. Alaric smiled, his heart softening at her enthusiasm. "I thought we agreed I'm just a regular person now." "You'll always be Santa to me," Clara said, beaming. He sat down beside her, watching as she carefully colored in the outlines of a snowy cabin surrounded by trees. "That's beautiful," he said. "Is it a picture of something real?" Clara nodded. "It's what I dream about. A house with a big family. Lots of love and laughter. My mom said someday I'd find it." Alaric swallowed hard, his throat tight. You deserve that, he said softly. Every child deserves that. Clara turned to him, her expression serious. What about you? Do you have a family? The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, unsure of how much to say. I did, once, he admitted. But I lost them. Her small hand reached out, resting lightly on his. Maybe you can find them again. Her innocence, her unwavering belief in the possibility of love and connection, was a stark contrast to the guarded life he had built. He realized in that moment how much he wanted to be the person she believed he could be, the kind of person who didn't walk away. The following days were a whirlwind. Alaric threw himself into action, meeting with lawyers and contacting the directors of the shelter. He made anonymous donations to cover immediate needs and began laying the groundwork to ensure the shelter would remain open. But he knew this was only the beginning. Clara needed more than charity. She needed a family. One snowy afternoon, Alaric sat with Judith in her office at the hospital. He had come to discuss Clara's future, knowing it was time to make his intentions clear. I want to adopt her, he said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. Judith studied him carefully. Mr. Hensley, adoption is a serious commitment. Clara has been through so much already. She'll need stability, patience, and unconditional love. I understand, Alaric said. I've spent my life building an empire, but for what? It's all meaningless if I can't make a difference for her. She's family, Judith. She just doesn't know it yet. Judith's expression softened. If you're sure, I'll do everything I can to support you. But you'll need to tell Clara the truth. Alaric nodded, the weight of the task ahead settling over him. He knew the road would not be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond himself. That evening, he returned to the shelter and found Clara sitting by the window, watching the snow fall. He sat beside her, his heart pounding as he prepared to speak. Clara, he began gently, do you remember when you asked me if I had a family? She nodded, her wide eyes full of curiosity. I think I found part of mine, he said. And it's you. Her brow furrowed, confusion crossing her face. Me? He took a deep breath. Your mom, Odessa, was my sister. That makes you my niece. My family. Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment, she was silent. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. So, you're like my uncle? Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I'd like to be more than that. I'd like to be your family. Clara threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. I always knew you were special, she whispered, even without the Santa suit. As he held her, Alaric felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He had lost so much, but now he had the chance to rebuild. For Clara, for himself, and for the family he had thought was gone forever. In the days that followed, Alaric's life transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. His mornings, once dominated by boardroom meetings and financial calls, now began with visits to the children's hospital. Clara's room became his second home, a place where he felt his hardened exterior soften with every shared moment. Whether they were reading stories, drawing pictures, or simply talking about her dreams, he found himself captivated by her resilience and unshakable optimism. Clara seemed to glow with excitement each time he arrived, her laughter echoing down the hospital hallways. Despite her fragile health, she exuded an energy that was impossible to ignore. Alaric marveled at how such a small child, burdened by so much loss, could still find joy in the smallest things. A snowflake melting on her hand, the sound of jingle bells ringing in the distance, or the way the lights on the hospital's Christmas tree sparkled. One afternoon, as Clara napped, Alaric sat with Judith in her office to discuss the adoption process. Papers and folders cluttered her desk, and the faint hum of holiday music played from a nearby radio. We're moving as quickly as we can, Judith assured him. But the courts can be slow, and Clara's case is more complicated because of her medical needs. Are you sure you're ready for this? It's a significant commitment. Alaric leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. I've never been more certain of anything, he said. Clara deserves stability, love, and someone who will fight for her. I want to be that person. Judith nodded, her expression thoughtful. She's lucky to have you. But you'll need to be honest with her about what this means. She's been through a lot, and she'll need time to adjust. I understand, Alaric said. I'll do whatever it takes. Later that evening, Alaric and Clara sat together in the shelter's common room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. Clara was curled up beside him, her head resting against his arm as she clutched her locket. They had spent the afternoon decorating cookies with the other children, and remnants of icing still clung to her fingers. Uncle Alaric, Clara said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. What happens after Christmas? He looked down at her, startled by the question. What do you mean? Do I have to go somewhere else? She asked, her blue eyes meeting his. The nurses say I might have to move again. Alaric's chest tightened. He had been so focused on the logistics of the adoption that he hadn't considered how much uncertainty Clara must have felt. He reached out, gently taking her small hand in his. No, sweetheart, he said. You're not going anywhere. I'm going to make sure you have a home, a real home, with me. Clara's face lit up, her smile wide and bright. Really? Like, forever? Forever, Alaric promised. We'll be a family. Clara threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Her joy was infectious, and for the first time in years, Alaric felt a warmth he hadn't known since Lila's passing. He realized then that Clara wasn't just filling the void his daughter had left. She was helping him rediscover a part of himself he thought he had lost. But even as he reveled in the moment, a nagging worry lingered in the back of his mind. Clara's health was fragile, and her upcoming surgery loomed like a dark cloud. The doctors were optimistic, but Alaric couldn't shake the fear that he might lose her before they even had a chance to build the life he envisioned. The next morning, Alaric met with Dr. Morales, the pediatric cardiologist overseeing Clara's care. The doctor was a kind, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a calming presence. Clara's condition is treatable, Dr. Morales explained, showing Alaric a series of charts and scans. The surgery will be complex, but she's a fighter. Her chances are good if we proceed soon. What's the risk? Alaric asked, his voice steady but tense. There's always risk with a procedure like this, Dr. Morales said. But without it, Clara's condition will worsen over time. She's already showing signs of fatigue and shortness of breath. Alaric nodded, his resolve firm. Do whatever you need to do. I'll cover the costs. Dr. Morales gave him a reassuring smile. We'll take good care of her. That evening, Alaric found Clara sitting by the window in her room, watching the snow fall. She had a sketchpad on her lap and was drawing a picture of a little girl and a man standing in front of a house surrounded by trees. That's us, she explained when Alaric sat beside her. You and me. And our house. It's beautiful, he said, his throat tightening with emotion. You're very talented, Clara beamed. Do you think we'll ever really have a house like that? I know we will, Alaric said. But first, we need to make sure you're strong and healthy. Dr. Morales wants to do a special surgery to help your heart. Clara looked at him with wide eyes. Will it hurt? They'll make sure you don't feel anything, Alaric assured her. And I'll be with you the whole time. I promise. Clara nodded, her trust in him unwavering. Okay, she said softly. If you'll be there, I'm not scared. In that moment, Alaric knew he would do anything to protect her, to give her the life she deserved. She had already changed his world in ways he hadn't thought possible, and he was determined to make sure she had every chance to grow, thrive, and dream. As the snow continued to fall outside, Alaric held Clara close, feeling a sense of purpose that eclipsed anything he had ever felt before. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning of Clara's surgery arrived, bringing with it a tension that seemed to hang in the air like the heavy clouds outside. Alaric sat in the hospital's waiting area, his hands gripping a steaming cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking. Around him, families whispered quietly, their expressions a mixture of hope and worry. Despite the warmth of the room, Alaric felt cold, his nerves raw as he thought about Clara lying in the operating room. He replayed her words from the night before in his mind. If you'll be there, I'm not scared. She had said it with such trust, such unwavering faith, that it had nearly undone him. For the first time in years, someone believed in him, Not as a businessman, not as a figure of authority, but as a person. That belief was now his anchor, holding him steady as the hours dragged on. Judith arrived midway through the morning, bringing a sense of calm with her presence. She sat beside Alaric, offering him a reassuring smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I've been better," he admitted. "I just want this to be over." "She's been through so much already." "She has," Judith agreed. "But Clara's stronger than she looks. And she has you now. That makes all the difference." Alaric nodded, though the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. For so long, he had relied on control of his business, his image, his emotions. But sitting here, waiting helplessly, he realized just how powerless he was. It terrified him. Time crawled by, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, the doors to the operating wing swung open, and Dr. Morales emerged. Her scrubs were marked with faint traces of the long procedure, but her expression was calm. "The surgery went well," she said, her voice steady and confident. "Clara's heart responded exactly as we hoped. She's in recovery now, and we'll be monitoring her closely for the next few days." Alaric exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him, so overwhelming that he had to steady himself against the armrest of the chair. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Dr. Morales assured him. "She'll be groggy for a while, but she'll want to see you when she wakes up." The hours that followed were a blur. When Alaric was finally allowed into Clara's recovery room, he was struck by how small and fragile she looked in the hospital bed. Her face was pale, framed by her golden curls, but her chest rose and fell steadily. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down, taking her tiny hand in his. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice breaking just a little. "You did it. You're so brave." Clara's eyelids fluttered open, and she smiled weakly. "Hi, Uncle Alaric," she murmured, her voice faint but warm. "Told you I wasn't scared." He chuckled, brushing a stray curl away from her face. "You're the bravest person I know," he said, "and I'm so proud of you." Clara's fingers curled around his hand, her grip surprisingly firm despite her exhaustion. "Did Dasher wait for me?" Alaric glanced at the small stuffed reindeer sitting on the bedside table and smiled. "Of course he did. He's been waiting right here the whole time." Clara's smile grew, and her eyes drifted shut again. Alaric stayed by her side, his heart swelling with a mix of love and gratitude. She was safe, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. Over the next few days, Clara's recovery progressed steadily. Alaric rarely left the hospital, spending most of his time reading to her, helping her color, or simply keeping her company. The other children on the floor quickly took notice of the man who always seemed to be around, and soon they were flocking to him as well. He found himself fielding questions about his Santa suit, recounting exaggerated tales of reindeer mischief, and even sneaking extra cookies from the nurse's station. For the first time in years, Alaric felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with his wealth or status. These children, Clara especially, reminded him of the simple joys he had long since forgotten. And as he watched Clara's cheeks regain their color and her laughter return, he knew he had made the right choice. One snowy afternoon, as Clara sat propped up in her hospital bed, she looked at Alaric with an expression of quiet determination. "Uncle Alaric," she said, her voice stronger now, "when I get out of here, can we make my dream house real?" He tilted his head, intrigued. "Your dream house?" "The one I drew," Clara explained, reaching for her sketchpad. She flipped through the pages until she found the picture of the cozy cabin surrounded by trees. "A house where we can be a family, with a big tree for Christmas and lots of space for Dasher." Alaric studied the drawing, his chest tightening. He could see the hope in her eyes, the longing for a place to call home. "I think we can do that," he said finally. "In fact, I'll make sure of it." Clara's face lit up, her joy infectious. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," Alaric said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "We'll make it happen. Together." As the days turned into weeks, Alaric began to put plans into motion. He reached out to architects, began scouting locations near Leavenworth, and poured his energy into creating the home Clara had dreamed of. But more importantly, he focused on building the life she deserved. A life filled with love, stability, and the kind of magic she had always believed in. With each passing day, Alaric felt the walls around his heart crumble. Clara wasn't just healing. She was helping him heal too. And for the first time in years, he was looking forward to the future, with Clara by his side. The snow continued to fall steadily in Leavenworth as the holiday season began to wind down, but for Alaric and Clara, it felt as though life was just beginning. The hospital staff, impressed by Clara's resilience and the steady improvement in her health, prepared for her discharge. Each step forward brought relief and excitement, though Alaric could feel the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. He wasn't just helping Clara recover. He was becoming her family, her constant, her home. Clara's excitement was infectious as the day of her release approached. She talked endlessly about what life would be like once they left the hospital, her imagination running wild. She wanted to decorate her room with snowflakes and reindeer, bake cookies in a big kitchen, and plant a garden in the spring. Her optimism was boundless, and Alaric found himself swept up in her dreams. "Uncle Alaric, can we get a dog too?" she asked one morning, her cheeks rosy as she sat up in bed, sketching yet another picture of their future house. "A dog?" he asked, pretending to consider the idea seriously. "What kind of dog are we talking about here? Something small, like a poodle? Or something big, like a Saint Bernard?" Clara giggled, her curls bouncing as she shook her head. "Not too big. Maybe a golden retriever. They're friendly." "Friendly, huh? I think we could manage that," Alaric said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But first, we need to make sure you're ready to take care of a dog. They're a lot of responsibility." "I'll be the best dog owner ever," Clara declared, her eyes shining with determination. "Just wait and see." Alaric couldn't help but laugh. Her energy was contagious, and he found himself wondering how he had managed to live so many years without this kind of joy in his life. He made a silent vow to ensure Clara's future was as bright and happy as she imagined it to be. On the day of Clara's discharge, the hospital staff gathered to send her off with hugs, well wishes, and a festive balloon tied to her wheelchair. Alaric stood by her side, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder as she beamed at everyone around her. "Thank you for taking such good care of me," Clara said, her voice sincere. "I'll miss you all, but I'm excited to go home with my uncle." "You'll do great, Clara," Judith said warmly, kneeling to give her a final hug. "And don't be a stranger. Come visit us when you're all settled." "I will," Clara promised, clutching the balloon string tightly. "Thank you for everything." As they stepped outside into the crisp winter air, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The world beyond the hospital doors felt bigger and brighter than she remembered, the snow-covered streets sparkling in the sunlight. She turned to Alaric, her face alight with wonder. "It's so beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Alaric agreed, his gaze soft as he looked at her. "And it's all waiting for you." Their first stop was the Snowhaven Inn, where Alaric had arranged for a suite to be prepared for Clara while he finalized the plans for their permanent home. The hotel staff greeted her warmly, showering her with attention and small gifts, a basket of treats, a plush blanket, and a handmade Christmas ornament with her name on it. Clara's eyes widened as they entered the suite. The living area was adorned with twinkling lights, a miniature Christmas tree, and a plate of freshly baked cookies waiting on the coffee table. She ran to the window, pressing her hands against the glass as she gazed out at the snowy town below. "This is amazing," she said, spinning around to face Alaric. "Is this where we'll live?" "For now," he said, smiling at her enthusiasm. "But it's just temporary. Our real home is still in the works." Clara nodded, satisfied. "It's perfect." Over the next few days, Alaric and Clara settled into a routine. Mornings were spent exploring the town, where Clara quickly became a favorite among the locals. Shopkeepers waved to her as she passed by, offering her candies and warm drinks. Afternoons were spent back at the hotel, where they worked on plans for their future home. Alaric had already hired an architect to bring Clara's vision to life, and the two of them spent hours poring over blueprints and discussing every detail. Clara insisted on a large fireplace for Christmas stockings, a big bay window for watching snowstorms, and a playroom filled with books and art supplies. "Are you sure you don't want to be an architect when you grow up?" Alaric teased one evening as Clara meticulously sketched out her ideas. "No," she said thoughtfully. "I think I want to be a teacher, or maybe a writer, or a veterinarian." "Well," Alaric said, grinning, "you've got plenty of time to decide. And whatever you choose, I'll be there to cheer you on." Clara smiled, her face glowing with happiness. "Thanks, Uncle Alaric. You're the best." As the days turned into weeks, Alaric began to notice subtle changes in himself. The walls he had built around his heart were crumbling, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection he hadn't felt in years. Clara had reignited something in him, a spark of hope, a belief in the possibility of happiness. He no longer saw himself as a man defined by loss and grief. Instead, he was becoming someone who could create a future worth living for. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Uncle Alaric," she said, her voice soft, "do you think my mom would be happy that I found you?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered without hesitation. "I think she'd be very happy," he said. "She loved you so much, Clara. And I think she'd be glad to know you're with someone who loves you just as much." Clara's smile was small but radiant. "I think so too." As the fire crackled and the snow fell gently outside, Alaric felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Clara had given him a second chance at family, at love, at life. And for that, he would be forever grateful. Weeks passed, and life for Alaric and Clara began to settle into a steady rhythm. Clara's recovery continued to progress, her cheeks growing rosier and her energy returning in bursts that often left Alaric smiling. She had a way of filling every space she entered with light, whether it was the quiet corners of the hotel suite or the bustling streets of Leavenworth. For the first time in years, Alaric found himself looking forward to each day, eager to see what new joy Clara would bring. One chilly morning, they bundled up and headed to the property Alaric had purchased for their future home. The plot of land sat just outside the town, nestled among towering evergreens, with a view of the snow-capped mountains in the distance. Clara's excitement was palpable as they walked through the site, her boots crunching in the snow. "This is where the living room will go," she declared, pointing to a patch of frosty ground. "And over there, that's where we'll put the big Christmas tree." Alaric chuckled, his breath visible in the crisp air. "You've really thought of everything, haven't you?" "Of course," Clara said, her voice brimming with pride. "It has to be perfect." "It will be," Alaric promised, his gaze softening as he watched her. "Just like you." Clara beamed, skipping ahead to explore the area. Alaric stayed back for a moment, taking in the sight of her golden curls bouncing against the snowy backdrop. It was moments like this that reminded him how much his life had changed since meeting her. She had given him more than he ever thought possible: hope, purpose, and a chance to rebuild not only her life but his own. Later that afternoon, they returned to the Snowhaven Inn, where Clara's drawings of their future home continued to evolve. She had added a treehouse to her plans, insisting that it was an essential part of their backyard. Alaric listened intently to her ideas, scribbling notes and making mental plans to ensure every detail came to life. As evening fell, the two of them settled in by the fire, sipping hot cocoa topped with marshmallows. Clara curled up with a book, her eyes scanning the pages with a focus that made Alaric smile. She was an old soul in so many ways, wise beyond her years yet still filled with the boundless wonder of childhood. "Uncle Alaric," she said suddenly, looking up from her book, "what was your favorite part of Christmas when you were little?" The question caught him off guard, pulling him back to memories he had long since buried. He thought about the farm where he and Odessa had grown up, the way their mother would bake cookies while their father strung lights across the porch. He remembered the laughter, the warmth, the sense of togetherness that had once defined the holiday. "Probably decorating the tree," he said after a moment. "Odessa and I used to fight over who got to hang the star on top." Clara giggled. "I bet you always let her win." "Not always," Alaric admitted with a smile. "But most of the time." Clara's expression grew thoughtful. "I wish I could have met her." Alaric's heart ached at the quiet longing in her voice. "She would have loved you," he said softly. "You remind me of her in so many ways." Clara didn't respond right away, her gaze dropping to the locket she still wore around her neck. She traced the floral pattern with her fingers, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Do you think she's watching us?" she asked finally. "From heaven?" "I do," Alaric said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "And I think she's proud of you. She's proud of how strong and brave you are." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to make her proud." "You already have," Alaric assured her. "Every single day." The moment hung between them, filled with unspoken emotion and an unbreakable bond. For Alaric, it was yet another reminder of how much Clara had come to mean to him, how deeply she had become a part of his life. The following week brought more changes as the adoption process moved forward. The court hearings were straightforward, thanks to Judith's support and Alaric's determination to give Clara the stable, loving home she deserved. When the final papers were signed, Alaric felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. Clara was officially his, and the thought filled him with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. That evening, he surprised her with a small celebration in their suite. The hotel staff had decorated the room with balloons and streamers, and a cake sat on the table, its frosting spelling out the words, "Welcome home, Clara." Clara's face lit up when she saw the display, her hands flying to her mouth in surprise. "Is this all for me?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Of course," Alaric said, kneeling down to her level. "You're part of my family now, and that's something worth celebrating." Clara threw her arms around him, her hug so tight it took his breath away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Alaric said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever give you." As they sat down to eat cake and share stories, Alaric felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Clara had come into his life like a whirlwind, challenging him, changing him, and teaching him what it truly meant to love. She had reminded him of the magic he thought he had lost and shown him that even the most broken hearts could find a way to heal. The night ended with Clara asleep in her bed, clutching Dasher and dreaming of their future together. Alaric stood by the window, watching the snow fall gently outside. For the first time in years, he felt whole, his heart no longer burdened by loss, but filled with hope for the days to come. As the winter days stretched on, the bond between Alaric and Clara deepened. Their routine at the snow haven and became a comforting rhythm of shared meals, warm fireside evenings, and laughter that echoed through the halls. Clara's health continued to improve, her cheeks gaining color and her energy returning in a way that amazed Alaric. She was thriving, and for the first time in years, so was he. The construction of their new home had begun in earnest. Clara insisted on visiting the site often, bundled in her puffy coat and scarf, her excitement bubbling over as she watched the progress. She had taken to carrying her sketchpad with her, always ready to add new ideas or point out small details she wanted to include. "Uncle Alaric, can we have a swing on the porch?" she asked one chilly afternoon as they stood near the foundation. "A swing, huh?" Alaric said, pretending to think it over. "I don't know. Swings are a lot of responsibility." Clara giggled, her breath visible in the cold air. "I'll take care of it. I promise." "All right," he relented, smiling. "A swing it is. But only if you promise to teach me how to swing as high as you can." "Deal," she exclaimed, her laughter carrying through the crisp air. Watching her, Alaric felt a swell of pride. She had come so far from the frail, quiet girl he'd first met in the hospital. Her resilience and joy reminded him daily of the strength it took to heal, and he found himself in awe of her determination. One evening, as they sat in the suite sharing hot chocolate, Clara brought up a topic that had been on her mind. "Uncle Alaric, do you think we'll be moved into the house by next Christmas?" "I think it's possible," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The builders are working hard, and we're making good progress." "Why? Already thinking about Christmas decorations?" Clara nodded enthusiastically. "I want to put lights everywhere, and we can have the biggest tree ever. Oh, and stockings for both of us, and maybe one for the dog if we get one." Alaric smiled, her excitement warming him. I think that sounds like the perfect plan. Clara's face grew thoughtful for a moment. Do you think Mom would have liked it? Our house, I mean. The question struck a tender chord in Alaric. He set down his mug and looked at her, his voice soft. I think she would have loved it. She'd be proud of you, Clara, of how strong and kind you are. Clara smiled, a flicker of emotion in her eyes. I hope so. The holidays gradually faded into the backdrop of daily life, but Clara's dreams of their new home kept her spirits high. Alaric, too, found himself growing more optimistic with each passing day. He had started to let go of the walls he'd built around himself, allowing joy and hope to take their place. He no longer felt the weight of his past as a burden. Instead, he saw it as a foundation for the future they were building together. One afternoon, while Clara was at a craft workshop at the local library, Alaric received an unexpected call. It was from Judith, her tone hesitant but warm. Alaric, I wanted to check in on you and Clara, she began. I also came across something that I thought you might want to see. What is it? He asked, curiosity piqued. When we were cleaning out some old files at the shelter, we found a letter that Odessa wrote. It was addressed to Clara, but she was too young to understand it at the time. I thought you might want to decide when and how to share it with her. Alaric's breath caught. A letter from Odessa. The thought of holding her words in his hands filled him with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Thank you, Judith. Can I pick it up today? Of course, Judith replied. I'll leave it at the front desk for you. That evening, after Clara had gone to bed, Alaric sat alone by the fire, holding the envelope in his hands. It was old and slightly crumpled, the handwriting familiar yet distant. He opened it carefully, his heart pounding as he unfolded the paper. The letter was short, written in Odessa's looping script. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay with you as long as I wanted to. But I need you to know something very important. You are so loved. From the moment I held you in my arms, you became my whole world. I may not have been perfect, but I tried to give you all the love I had. I hope that someday you'll find family who will love you as much as I do. You are a bright, beautiful star, Clara, and the world is better because you're in it. Never forget that you belong, and you are loved. With all my heart, Mom. Alaric's chest tightened as he read the words, imagining Odessa's face as she wrote them. The love in her letter was undeniable, a testament to the bond she and Clara had shared. He knew now that Clara needed to see this, needed to hear her mother's voice and feel that connection. The next morning, after breakfast, Alaric sat down with Clara in the suite's cozy living room. He held the letter carefully, his voice steady but gentle as he spoke. Clara, there's something I want to share with you. It's a letter your mom wrote for you. Clara's eyes widened, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. A letter? From Mom? Yes, he said, handing it to her. She wrote it because she wanted you to know how much she loved you. Clara took the letter, her small hands trembling slightly. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, her lips quivered, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. But when she looked up at Alaric, her face was filled not with sadness, but with a deep, quiet joy. She really loved me, Clara whispered. She did, Alaric said, pulling her into a gentle hug. More than anything, Clara held the letter tightly to her chest, her voice steady but soft. Thank you for giving this to me. It's like I can hear her voice. Alaric kissed the top of her head, his heart full. She'll always be with you, Clara, and so will I. As they sat together, the letter clutched in Clara's hands, Alaric felt a profound sense of peace. This moment, this connection to the past and the promise of the future, was everything he had hoped for. Clara had found her family, and in doing so, she had helped Alaric find his as well. The weeks after Clara read her mother's letter were filled with a deepening sense of connection and healing. She often kept the letter close, tucked under her pillow or safely folded in her sketchpad, as if carrying a part of Odessa with her wherever she went. For Alaric, seeing Clara's confidence and happiness grow was more rewarding than anything he had ever experienced. She was blooming in ways that both delighted and humbled him. The construction of their house continued steadily, and Clara's excitement grew with each passing day. She peppered Alaric with questions about when they could move in and eagerly sketched new ideas to add to the plans. One afternoon, while visiting the site, she stood in what would soon be the living room and stretched her arms out wide. "This is where we'll put the Christmas tree," she announced with certainty. "And we'll hang stockings right over there." She pointed to the mantelpiece, which was still being built but already taking shape. Alaric smiled, imagining the holidays they would share in this space. "I think that's a perfect spot," he said, kneeling beside her. "Are you already planning next year's Christmas?" "Of course," Clara said, grinning. "It's going to be the best one ever." That night, back at the Snowhaven Inn, Clara sat at the small table in their suite, carefully coloring a new drawing. Alaric watched her from the couch, his heart full as he marveled at how far she had come. There was a lightness to her now, a sense of security that had replaced the uncertainty she carried when they first met. "Uncle Alaric," Clara said suddenly, looking up from her work, "do you think Mom would have wanted us to live in the house together?" "I do," Alaric said, his voice steady. "I think she'd be happy knowing you're surrounded by love." Clara nodded thoughtfully, her face brightening. "I think so too." But even as Clara's dreams flourished, Alaric found himself wrestling with a lingering worry. Clara's health had stabilized, but her recovery was ongoing. She would need regular checkups and, potentially, further treatments as she grew older. He had made it his mission to give her everything she needed, but the responsibility weighed heavily on him. He couldn't bear the thought of anything jeopardizing the life they were building. One snowy morning, as Clara attended a holiday crafting class at the library, Alaric met with Dr. Morales to discuss her long-term care plan. The doctor, ever reassuring, laid out the steps they would take to monitor Clara's condition. "She's doing incredibly well," Dr. Morales said, her tone confident. "But we'll need to stay vigilant. As she grows, her heart will need periodic evaluations, and there's always the possibility of additional interventions." Alaric nodded, absorbing the information. "Whatever she needs, I'll make sure she gets it." Dr. Morales smiled warmly. "She's lucky to have you, and I can see how much you care about her. That love and stability will make all the difference." After the meeting, Alaric walked through the snow-covered streets of Leavenworth, his mind swirling with thoughts of the future. He wanted to give Clara the kind of life Odessa had dreamed of for her, a life filled with safety, joy, and endless possibilities. But the enormity of that task sometimes felt daunting. Still, he knew he would do whatever it took. Later that afternoon, Alaric and Clara visited the shelter where she had once stayed. They brought with them a collection of gifts for the children, books, toys, and warm clothing, and spent the afternoon handing them out. Clara was in her element, chatting easily with the younger kids and helping them unwrap their presents. One little boy, no older than 4, clung to Clara's side as she showed him how to stack blocks from the building set he had received. Alaric watched from across the room, his chest tightening with pride. Clara had a way of making everyone around her feel seen and valued, a gift that reminded him of Odessa. As the day wound down, Clara tugged on Alaric's sleeve. "Uncle Alaric, can we come back here again? I want to help more." "Of course," Alaric said, his voice full of warmth. "We'll come back as often as you'd like." That night, Clara sat on the floor of their suite, surrounded by crayons and paper as she worked on a new drawing. Alaric joined her, sitting cross-legged beside her as she carefully outlined a cozy scene of their future home. The drawing showed a glowing house with smoke curling from the chimney, a snowman in the yard, and a swing on the porch. "What's this?" Alaric asked, pointing to a small figure she had drawn next to the swing. "That's Mom," Clara said softly. "She's watching us, making sure we're happy." Alaric felt his throat tighten, but he managed to smile. "She'd love this drawing, Clara. It's beautiful." Clara looked up at him, her expression serious but hopeful. "Do you think she knows that we're building this house and making a family?" "I think she knows," Alaric said, pulling her into a gentle hug. "And I think she's smiling right now." The rest of the evening passed quietly, the two of them content in each other's company. As Clara drifted off to sleep later that night, clutching Dasher close, Alaric sat by the window, watching the snow fall over Leavenworth. His thoughts lingered on Odessa, on the sacrifices she had made, and the gift she had left behind in Clara. He vowed to honor her memory by giving Clara the best life possible. As the town settled into the quiet of night, Alaric felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come to Leavenworth as a man burdened by loss, but Clara had shown him that even the deepest wounds could heal. Together, they were building something beautiful, a family rooted in love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. As winter gave way to early spring, the construction of Alaric and Clara's home entered its final stages. Clara's excitement was boundless as she watched the finishing touches come together. The porch swing she had requested, the large bay window perfect for watching snowstorms, and the cozy fireplace that would soon hold their Christmas stockings. Alaric marveled at how she had turned the house into a symbol of their shared dreams, her imagination breathing life into every corner. The day they moved in dawned bright and clear, the snow beginning to melt in patches across the lawn. Alaric carried box after box into the house, letting Clara take the lead on deciding where things should go. She flitted from room to room, her laughter echoing through the space as she claimed each area with the enthusiasm only a child could bring. "This will be my art corner," she declared, pointing to a sunny nook in the living room. "And Dasher's bed can go right here by the fireplace." "Dasher's bed? Huh?" Alaric teased. "He's got quite the prime spot." "Well, he's a very important reindeer," Clara said with a grin, clutching the stuffed animal close. "He deserves it." By the afternoon, the house was starting to feel like home. Clara insisted on unpacking her art supplies first, setting up her pencils and crayons neatly in her chosen corner. Alaric watched her with a mixture of pride and gratitude, his heart swelling as he saw how far they had come. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Alaric and Clara stood together on the porch, admiring the view. The swing swayed gently in the breeze, and Clara climbed onto it, her legs kicking lightly as she looked out over the sprawling yard. "Uncle Alaric," she said, her voice quiet but filled with wonder, "do you think this is what Mom dreamed of for us?" Alaric sat beside her, his hand resting on the swing's chain. "I think it's exactly what she wanted," he said. "A home filled with love, where you can grow and be happy." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think she'd be proud." "She would," Alaric said, his throat tight. "She loved you so much, Clara, and I know she's smiling down on us right now." The days that followed were a blur of settling in and creating routines. Clara explored every inch of the house, discovering little details she had missed before. A heart-shaped knot in the wood of her bedroom door, the way the morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside her window at night. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Clara reached for her sketchpad and flipped to a fresh page. "Can I draw you, Uncle Alaric?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Me?" Alaric said, feigning surprise. "Are you sure you want to draw an old guy like me?" Clara giggled. "You're not old. And you're not just you, your family. That makes you special." Her words struck a chord deep within Alaric. He nodded, settling back in his chair. "All right then, do your worst." Clara worked in silence, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. Alaric watched her, the firelight dancing in her curls and the faint sound of her pencil scratching against the paper. When she finally finished, she turned the pad around to show him. The drawing was simple yet striking. It showed Alaric sitting in his chair, his face softened by a gentle smile, with Clara perched on the armrest beside him. Above them, she had drawn a faint outline of a woman, her hand resting on Clara's shoulder. "That's Mom," Clara explained, pointing to the figure. "She's always with us." Alaric felt a lump rise in his throat as he stared at the drawing. It was more than a picture. It was a testament to how much they had healed, how far they had come together. He reached out, pulling Clara into a hug. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like you." The months passed quickly, and before they knew it, summer had arrived. Clara thrived in her new home, spending her days playing in the yard, reading in the bay window, and painting vivid pictures of the life they were building. Alaric threw himself into fatherhood with a determination that surprised even him, learning how to braid her hair, bake her favorite cookies, and cheer her on during impromptu soccer games in the yard. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Reading bedtime stories, sharing laughs over breakfast, and simply sitting together on the porch swing, watching the stars. These were the moments that filled Alaric's heart with a sense of completeness he hadn't thought possible. As Christmas approached once more, Clara's excitement returned in full force. They decorated the house together, stringing lights along the porch and hanging ornaments on the tree in the living room. Clara insisted on baking cookies for the neighbors, and Alaric found himself elbow-deep in flour and frosting more times than he cared to admit. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire, Clara looked up at Alaric with a serious expression. "Uncle Alaric," she said, "this is the best Christmas ever." "Why's that?" he asked, his heart warming at her words. "Because I have everything I ever wanted," Clara said simply. "A home, a family, and you." Alaric reached out, taking her small hand in his. "And I have you," he said. "That's the best gift I could ever ask for." As the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside, Alaric felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Clara had not only changed his life, she had given it meaning. Together, they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that honored the love of the family they had lost and celebrated the joy of the family they had found. For the first time in years, Alaric felt truly whole, and as Clara leaned against him, her golden curls brushing his arm, he knew that their story was just beginning.